Well, welcome everyone to another session of the 18th annual Transforming the Teaching and Learning Environment Virtual Conference. I'm Bob Ailes. I am your moderator. Don't forget, this year we're sponsored by the Journal of Educators Online, JEO. They have a plethora of refereed articles dating back to 2004. They're bound to be something useful for you and all of those. So if you have a chance, take a look. It's thejeo.com. So we have with us Kelly Olson Stewart as a doctor of education and educational leadership and innovation, and more than 30 years experience in K, K through 12 education as a teacher, instructional coach, administrator, and also higher education faculty. Um, she's served in leadership and faculty roles at Ashford and UAGC. So you were part of that merger, were you? What,
Yeah,
just
I've
a
been,
year or
I've
two
been,
ago?
yep, and I've been with University of Arizona. I've been with them for the last 10 years already. So,
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
lots of changes.
Uh, okay. Let me turn it over to you, Kelly,
Awesome.
and talk about making distance work.
Thanks, Bob. Well, thanks everybody for being here. We're going to talk about how do you do this in a remote environment. So I'm fully online. This is the last 10 years have shifted to be in a completely remote environment. And I've really started to dig in, really for the last 10 years. I've kind of nerded out around this idea of how do we create a culture when we are all on Zoom, essentially. And this is even, pre-COVID, before we got real used to being on Zoom. So, how do you create a culture when your time and engagement is spent in little Zoom squares? And so we're going to kind of unpack that a little bit, and I'll talk about my nerding out journey and then some of the what the research is telling us about that. This specific presentation is really focused on two books that I happen to be reading simultaneously, so I've kind of combined them. The Digital Body Language book by Erica Dhawan was transformative for me in the fact that I was looking for a tangible text that I could pick up and sort of navigate through what it is like to be fully online. A lot of Erica's book does talk about the hybrid environment as well, but it has such great strategies and a lot of research. At the same time, I was listening on my walking to Shatterproof by Tasha Eurich, and these sort of have dovetailed for me the idea of building trust and connection is the essential component. And then what does that life look like when we kind of live in a chaotic space? So the first thing we're going to talk about is this idea of the marble jar. And so I'm going to pull up this video by Brene Brown, and it's just a quick clip of her in an interview that we'll take a look at.
I've heard about your marble jar theory, so I got a jar of marbles.
I saw that.
Could you explain to me your theory?
This is how we teach trust. Where do I get my information? Ellen's in fourth grade, my oldest. She comes home from school. She slides down the door into a heap, sobbing. Oh my God, Ellen, are you okay? Are you hurt? What's going on? Something hard happened. She shared it very confidentially with one or two of her friends. They had told everybody in her class, all 30 kids. Everybody was laughing and pointing and making fun of her. And she said, I will never trust anyone again. And my mind was, damn straight, not a good person. You trust your mama, and that's it. That's not the right thing to do, right? You want a kid who can develop trust with others. So I said, trust is really hard. She said, I don't understand it. I said, trust is the marble jar. Every time you share something with someone that's confidential and they don't share it, they get a marble. When you want to share something really private and personal, you look for a friend whose jar is full of marbles. Do you have any marble jar friends? And she said, Hannah and Lorna. And I said, why? They've got big marble jars that are full. And I said, and this was why. It was crazy. Tell me something they do to earn marbles. Oh, well, like if I get to my tray late at lunch and there's no place to sit, Lorna will scoot over and give me half her seat and I can sit at the table. And then the other day when I had strep throat, Hannah was worried about me. So remember her mom called and said, Hannah's worried about Ellen. Why wasn't she at school? But then the biggest thing that Hannah did was the other day, Oma and Opa, my parents, came to my soccer game and Hannah looked over and goes, oh my God, your Oma and Opa are here. And I said, why was that a big deal? And she goes, because everybody's divorced and remarried, and I've got 4 sets of people, and she remembered their names. And what was shocking to me is that Ellen was conveying that these marbles were being earned on these very small. She knew my grandparents' name. She gave me a seat to sit at. She checked on me when I was missing school. Trust is built slowly over time, a marble at a time. And that's how we teach trust to the most senior leaders in Fortune 100 companies. But
I've heard about your marble jar
Let
theory.
me pause that. There we go. So when you think about the marble jar theory, we're going to keep that analogy in our minds, and you're thinking about building connection, care, and community. Those are the 3 themes that came up, ironically, for me when I have done repeated studies with our associate faculty. So when I came over from K-12 world fully into higher ed and was working with about 100 associate faculty, because the majority of our courses were taught by associate faculty. And I had been an associate faculty in another institution. And oftentimes, I called myself the pajama professor. Oftentimes, I'm grading late at night, not really connected to the university itself, connected for sure to students, but was trying to figure out, how do I fit in this picture? How does my assessment fit into their overall structure? And one of the kind of ideas that kept sticking with me was this idea of I have 100 associate faculty. How do I make them feel part of the organization when almost 100%, maybe 98% of communication is done via email? It is all words on a page, and they get a lot of those emails. And so surveying and then interviewing and focus grouping associate faculty, these 3 ideas are what came out loud and clear, which we're filling the marble jar. It's connection, care, and community. Those are the 3 things they want. So when you think about a culture, how do you build a culture? Connection, care, and community will continue emerging in the research as well. Here's a connection here from Urich. This idea of figuring out what will work even in complex circumstances. And I think fully remote work is complex. And oftentimes we just sort of go, isn't this great? We all get to work from home without really thinking about how do we find a path to make sure that we are creating a community where people feel cared for. So today we're just going to talk about some of the core elements that contribute to creating a cohesive culture. We're going to talk about some communication practices. That's really what came out of that digital body language book, to reduce feelings of isolation, and then taking away some strategies. The goal always is for you to take some strategies away that you could try in your own space, whether it's face-to-face, honestly, hybrid, or fully online, to create a little bit of action and enthusiasm around how do you maybe do it better? How do you enhance the leading in a remote environment? You're going to see 2 icons that will appear throughout the presentation. One is a waterfall. That's your opportunity where we are going to use the chat. And the waterfall strategy is simply I'm going to ask a question. You're going to type in the chat, and then when you hear me say the word waterfall, you will hit return, and then they sort of fall, all the responses. And so you'll see this throughout to get your input as well in your experience. The other icon you're going to see on some of the slides are an idea to take with you. So just this light bulb idea, and these are the strategies that you can, plug into your toolbox and hopefully take away with you. These are some of my colleagues from Ashford, University of Arizona Global Campus. We changed names along the way there. But the reality is that you see we're in some of our graduation garb. The majority of of the interaction that I have had with these colleagues has been completely remote. It has been in 1-inch squares over Zoom or, I mean, Teams, whatever we were using 10 years ago, even. I was like, do we use Skype? And the connections that we forged had to be very intentional. And what I realized is that most of the people that I'm the most connected with now were people that I spent time with at graduation. Graduation is one of those times that we bring faculty together. And so we would bond over Zoom, like the same faces would be in my meetings, but then it was the social time during graduation, the hall waiting to go on in the hallways where you're standing around, the social events that we would have. That really started developing those additional layers of friendship, connection, care that then led to text threads and then led to being social media friends where you felt bonded. And I thought, this is great if you can go to graduation, if you're there, if you have the opportunity to make those connections. But if you're fully remote, always, how do we replicate those kind of dinner? Like you see us there at a long table at dinner. How do you replicate that experience when you're sitting in your own space behind a little square? So here's an opportunity to get some input from you as we keep moving here. What are the factors that shape the expectations, tone, and everyday norms within a workplace culture? What factors do you think shape the expectations, tone, and everyday norms within a workplace culture? And if you would go into the chat and just do some typing, and then I will say that word of that image, and we will see what we get. So let me be quiet here for a second while you think. All right, waterfall, let's see what we get. Yeah, Margie, nothing replaces the social connection. It just doesn't, right? It is those face-to-face opportunities. It just changes everything. Yeah, the frequency of interaction. There are some folks that I see very, very infrequently in meetings. Anything else? I'll watch if there's anything else that comes up. When I ran a department, so I ran a curriculum department for a school district, and I had 20 folks under my charge. One of the things that was helpful is that's it, Bob, the casual conversations. I knew what was happening in my staff's lives. I knew about babies, divorces, deaths. I knew about the latest recipe that they had found that was working for meal prepping on the weekends. We were having informal conversations in the hallways when things were emerging in their lives. That transformed the relationships. And in remote culture, you are meeting purposefully. And so some of that is missing. Yep, humor, sense of belonging. Thanks, everybody. Communication styles for sure. We're going to talk a little bit about that too. And just, yeah, the opportunities for collaboration can certainly be varied. Thanks for participating. So when you are thinking about a fully remote, so completely remote, go ahead and type in the chat some of the challenges we face. I know I've highlighted a couple already, but for you, what has your experience been? What are the challenges to create a cohesive culture in a fully remote environment? And waterfall? I didn't give you very much think time there, did I? Yeah, it's almost all the communication is written. Like that changes everything. And we're going to talk about how tone can be inferred. Yeah, you can't just drop in. You don't just run into someone. Everything is a scheduled interaction. That makes a huge difference. Yeah, how do you create a sense of belonging completely in a virtual world? Very challenging. And then the tone piece and how people read that. I know that looking at people's faces, and we're going to see some statistics here about the digital body language and just body language in general. Zoom does steal that option. It also changes the way that we interact just in conversational flow. Thanks. So we know that remote offices do tend to be fragmented. There is a definite difference in the trust factor because we are trusting someone behind a screen, very different than being in person to see all of the nuances. The boundaries are definitely blurred. Like there is absolutely an advantage to being able to run a load of laundry in between your meetings. There's also a disadvantage of it's 8 o'clock at night and I walk right by and there's my office and I can log back in and check in on something. It's hard to keep that work life balance. And like we've already talked about here, there's less opportunity for informal interaction. Every interaction that I have with my colleagues is scheduled. It's usually agendized. It has a very specific purpose. And if the informal interaction is happening, it's likely in text messaging. And it is still not the same as being in person for sure. We also know that our leaders are not specifically trained. We haven't really done any kind of, I mean, I have a degree in leadership. We didn't talk about this at all. Like, there's no work around, well, what does it mean if you shift to your hat to be a remote leader? What type of additional insights, strategies, research, best practices, what does that look and sound like? How do you sustain the culture and collaboration fully remote? How do I make it so that it's not artificial? You know, we at UAGC, we have a culture of caring that is to extend to students and to faculty and staff. So, what does a culture of caring look and sound like in a fully remote space? How does that not feel fake, right? And then it's easy to not have norms, processes, and expectations because the work is fast paced. You are running, but sitting, clicking from one meeting to the next, a lot of tasks to get done. And oftentimes we'll skip over norms and processes that if we were in person, we might have already had in place. We are all tech, right? So we are missing those nonverbal body cues. We're missing, unless you have a very expressive person, and one of the strategies is to be more expressive because you're in a small window in a little Zoom, but we're lacking, you can't tell unless I'm very overt about leaning forward, if I'm overt about my gestures. We're missing those nonverbal cues. You know, I could see on my staff's face when they would come down the hallway or they would come into a meeting. I could tell by their body language if they were additionally stressed that day. They were feeling frazzled, you know, something had happened and their kiddo was sick and they were trying to juggle all of the things. Like all of those nuances, we are unable to read through the screen now. Delayed responses, even in communication on Zoom. I still have to wait. I have to pause and then I have to give somebody else a chance to talk because we can't talk over each other on the tech tool, right? Using the tool. And we do an over reliance on quick replies. We want to get that email sent back to somebody. And so oftentimes we just are in task mode and we send it back, and that can be misinterpreted as, well, that wasn't that. They just said yes, or no, that's fine. Are they mad? What does that mean? So tech is great and tech is challenging. 70% of our communication is virtual and fully online. We're doing 30 to 100 emails per day. If 50%, the statistics are shocking, 50% of our tone is misinterpreted virtually. 50% of the time, the emails you send are likely misinterpreted on your tone. 60 to 80% of meaning is nonverbal. So that is face to face. So Zoom face versus like Kelly in person face, very different. And a 1.2 second delay impacts your listener's view and their attentiveness and how they rate you. So if I'm having tech issues, if I'm having a delay in my own Wi-Fi situation, which happens to people all the time, I've lost part of my audience, and that is an additional challenge that gets in the way of our communication. You know, one of the strategies actually that AI has brought forward is this idea of helping with tone, right? You have an email that comes through, it feels kind of prickly. You want to lower the temperature, you want to show that you're absolutely here for it. Putting it into whatever AI tool you love and saying, help me refine this message so that it sounds more approachable, more caring, more friendly. My husband was a police officer and then shifted into HR work after he was injured and left the law enforcement. And he's very direct just as a person. He was working with kindergarten teachers and in a school district and found they have really big feelings. Their kinder teachers, their kiddos have big feelings too. And he's so direct that they were misinterpreting his directness to be crabbiness or that he was unfriendly. So he started using Chat GPT to help him with his tone, and it changed everything. He recognized the patterns in language that he had and how they were receiving. It helped him to get better at his communication style with specific groups of people. So what's implicit in body language now has to be explicit in digital body language. We have to go out of our way to convey our feelings, our expressiveness, use of emoticons, use of exclamation points, use of the smiley face at the end of the sentence. All of that, the research tells us, is important. It does make a difference. It does help people to better understand the message. And so it's just something to be mindful of as you're thinking about, how am I creating a culture fully remote, and what does my messaging look and sound like? So there certainly are they've never met them in person. They're just watching them on the screen. If there is a sense of there's a lack of authenticity, if there are not clear expectations around how to communicate, how do I use the chat in a meeting? What is my email? What's the email protocol look like? Is there an expectation after that email that I say thank you, then you say you're welcome? Like now 12 emails have gone by for the need for one set of information. Lack of norms does create an uncertainty for people. And even after I've been doing it 10 years, I keep looking at our own practices and my own as a leader as well, thinking, okay, I've got to figure this out. I need to do this better to create a safer space for my faculty. So when we sense that leaders aren't being authentic, we can smell it a mile away. It causes team members to avoid bringing up issues for fear of retribution. So the idea of authentic leadership practices, and so we already have the space of we're already fully online, generates this sense of, well, I might get in trouble. Tone is misconstrued. So we shift into this anonymous mode. So in lots of meetings where you have an opportunity for folks to capture questions, there's some meeting happening and people are posting anonymously, or in surveys, nobody wants to attach their name to something. That should be a clue to us that we need to look more intentionally in order to fix what isn't working in this remote culture. So I want you to think for a minute, when you think about the best in-person leader that you have seen create a positive culture, the best in-person leader that you've seen create a positive culture, what are the specific behaviors or actions that generated that feeling? What are the specific behaviors or actions that generated that feeling of a positive culture in the in-person space? If you would type that, and then we'll take a peek. Okay, waterfall. Yeah, active listening. And right, what does that look like? You see people leaning in, you see that they're not doing anything else, right? But making eye contact and listening to you. In remote environments, you have no idea if they're on their phone. Additionally, if they're watching a movie off to the side, if they're, petting their dog, talking to their dog, all of the things that are happening in their world. answering the door, they're running away from the screen. In person, I had an amazing leader who took the time to get to know people personally. Compassionate, kind, funny, interested, genuine, caring. Yep, honest, Bob, humorous, kind. Yeah, those things you see right in front of you. Yeah, they say thank you, they smile, they look at you. Yes, they check on you. All of that, the caring pieces. All right, so then when you are thinking about online, so you have seen successful online leaders. What do they do? How is it any different? But what is it specifically that you have seen them do that does create a positive, it supports at least a positive culture? What are some of the things that you've seen successful online leaders utilize that creates that culture? Let's get some ideas from each other. And waterfall? Yeah, they validate your skills, they respect your input, they ask for your ideas, they listen. That's probably Margie the same, right? In person too. They do the same thing. Yeah. They are like they're talking to you like a well-known colleague, right? You get the general sense of they're honoring the expertise that you're bringing to the room. They're seeking your input. They're asking questions. Okay. All right, let's see if we come up with some other ones after we look at a few of these additional slides here. Let's see what the research tells us. So some of the practices, let's see if some of these came up as you were thinking. These are some of the practices that the research tells us do work in creating a remote culture. Setting norms. How often have you shown up in a virtual meeting and you have no idea of kind of what are we supposed to do? What is the expectation? Is the expectation for my camera to be on or off? Is the expectation for me to use the chat, not use the chat? Is there a time to use the chat? And then sort of the chaos that can be created when the chat is running a mile a minute and you're listening to a speaker and likely looking at a visual PowerPoint, something that is like multitasking for my brain now. Like it stretches my brain sometimes. And I think, how do I manage all of the things that are happening? Micro moments. So those little moments of connection that happen. One of you were talking about before the meeting, right? Those opportunities to chat before a meeting, learn about people and what's happening in their lives. How a leader generates equal participation so that multiple people are the majority of the people are providing input during a meeting. Human connections, finding out about what's happening in people's lives. The idea of a leader thinking about, could this be an email? Does it have to be a meeting? Should I use video so I can see people's faces, or is video not really needed here? Can I just Teams message somebody? What what makes sense for the message that they have? Reduce the talking head meetings. So how do we gain everyone's input and participation? Authenticity, transparency, and this idea of alignment of my actions and values. So if I tell you as a leader that I value your time and I value your input, but then at the last minute, I'm constantly changing my meetings, I'm scheduling, hey, just tomorrow, can you, if I'm scheduling a meeting at 3 o'clock on the West Coast, what does that mean for our East Coasters? So we have people all over the country. And so there's oftentimes big news that comes out like in the afternoon. Well, that's a hardship for our East Coasters because they have already logged off for the day. And then they get a text message from their friend and they feel compelled to go back and look at it and they get sucked back into work again. So the alignment of actions and values is something to be really mindful of. Encouraging life work balance in remote environments. That means that if you see a person who's on the treadmill during the meeting, that we are happy about that. They're taking care of themselves. They are walking outside and they're listening to the meeting. Is that okay? Is it okay that they're sitting in a coffee shop or they're in the carpool line? Normalizing that people have additional lives that are happening and being okay with that flexibility of a workplace and that they're still getting the work done. Time zones, I talked about time scheduling meetings in times that are make the most sense for the majority of people. Then also checking back in. What is working? So good leaders in remote environments check back in. Is this meeting working? Is it helpful? Is it moving us forward? What else do we need to do or how might we change it? And then video versus not video. So is this a meeting where it is helpful to make eye contact with everyone in the little squares? Or are there 17 pages of squares, and how important is it? How important is the message for folks to be on camera? Because there is a definite Zoom fatigue that is in the research because of the intensity of staring at a screen. Actually, there's some physiological challenges with people in their eyes, just the weariness that comes from back to back to back Zoom meetings. And then how do we shift people out of multitasking? So it's very evident in a lot of meetings when someone is either on their phone or, doing their grading or messaging someone else, and they're not fully present in the meeting. That's very different than, I'd stand in front of a group of people and I could tell what you were doing because I could see right in front. Even setting up norms and expectations about like who gets CC'd on an email, what does that mean? What are our expectations around using the BCC? All of those things. Perceptions people have of our behavior are real. So do people perceive that you're a person who like shows up to the meeting but is definitely doing your grading during the meeting and not fully attending? Do you ever have somebody's full attention? So the challenge is being additionally bigger and more overt in a remote environment because you don't have the body cues when you're in person. So setting up some protocols as a leader, setting up some expectations around email. Are you a very hierarchical organization? Does it matter if you call me Dr. Stewart or you just say, hey, Kelly? And that goes all the way up to your very top level. What does that look and sound like? Do we have expectations around when we send emails? Is it okay if we send an email on a Sunday? Do I expect people to respond on a Sunday? The other idea is read receipts. How do we feel about that? How does that make you feel when you see that there's a read receipt on that? Is there a way that we can help manage the monster of email where the bulk of our communication in remote environments come? Can we set up some norms and protocol to help people navigate through that to better use their time? Can there be an expectation that there's a subject in the subject line? Can we use acronyms like no need to respond, the NNTR? What does that look and sound like? This is oftentimes skipped because we just assume it's just email. We've been doing it now for so long. But setting up these protocols can really make a difference. Instant message or your Teams or whatever it is that you're using. Usually that should be for things that are more casual, even just informal check-ins like, hey, I know that you took your dog to your vet yesterday. How did that go? Hey, I'm checking in on the timeline for that project. Is everything on schedule? Little check-ins. You're not going to use Teams for like the huge engagement. And then think about some shorthand that you can use for Teams as well. Again, just over communicating expectations can make a difference to shorten people's wonderings about tone in some of these other spaces. Again, we talked about some of these. What is the expectation for a moderator? The muting, of course, most people are always on mute because of background noise. But then how do we revisit to make sure that our video meeting protocols are working and gather feedback from our audience itself? This idea of a meeting culture is significant in remote environments. You see all those P's there. Are your meetings purpose clearly defined? Every meeting you go to, do you know exactly why you're there? Do we know who is in the room and why they are there, the participants? What are the probable issues or concerns that are most likely to emerge from this meeting? What are we doing? What is the goal for when we leave the meeting? Because there's a lot of work that that you leave all these tasks to do, but what is the goal? What's our outcome? So defining those as leaders can make a huge difference for people. How long do we actually have to sit in a meeting? We tend to in our organization, we tend to use an hour as the standard norm, that we're setting hour-long meetings. What if we made the standard be 45 minutes? Then we have a passing period between meetings, because otherwise you can sit for 5 or 6 hours in back-to-back meetings. Does that make sense? How does that enhance like working from home? When you still haven't refilled your water bottle because you've been sitting in front of the screen that long. So, what are some of the things that we can do to shift out of the intensity of a meeting culture and generate some space for creativity and thinking and processing and informal connection? Which, by the way, in remote, I'm going to have to schedule, but I actually would have time if I had some space in my schedule to like just jump on a Zoom and say hi to a friend of mine, right? New book. I'm not getting this is a shameless plug for this book because I literally was reading it last night on the plane. It is called Your Best Meeting Ever by Rebecca Hines. 7 Principles for Designing Meetings That Get Things Done. So I wanted to read you this quote that struck me yesterday. It's gotten so bad that complaining about meetings has become a workplace sport. A sponsored Harris poll found that 18% of US adults would rather sit at the DMV, 17% would rather watch paint dry, 12% would rather endure a 4-hour commute, and 8% would prefer to suffer through a root canal than attend a status meeting. When surveys start comparing meetings to dental procedures and bureaucratic hellscapes, you know something has gone spectacularly wrong. So, new book. I'm so curious on unpacking this, but I am like only about 25 pages in. But really interesting to think about our use of meetings. And again, there are supposed to be investments. If they're not paying off, it's time to pull the plug. So, how do you create the culture where we use meetings to create the culture, but that it oftentimes doesn't feel like it's working for the majority of our participants? I'm just highlighting Dewan's 4 laws of digital body language. Most of these I've kind of touched on. Just be mindful that in the text itself, she has these specific 4 rules. Value visibly, communicate carefully, collaborate confidently, and trust totally. And that these are all components that will help you when you're thinking about generating a more inclusive space for your organization. This is important, right? Whether it's virtual or in person, to be impeccable with your words. Lots of research has come out recently about the burnout that has emerged from people in fully remote positions, which everyone is oftentimes surprised that there is a level of burnout when you are at home, because you think, well, you don't have the grind of driving through traffic, and you're not navigating like taking your lunch, figuring out all of those. You got to pick up a kid from school, or you're caregiving, or you can let your dog out anytime that they need to go. And yet people who are fully remote have complained about this level of burnout. Some of it is unfortunately to our own design or lack thereof, that we have missed setting up some of the norms and expectations. So it is absolutely, today is the day that you think about communication that you are in charge of. So meetings that you are running. You can start today to develop different communication norms, different expectations, create your own set rather than waiting for someone above you to create it. And so thinking about, how do you generate informal communication? How do you generate a space for like just pure connection, joy, laughing together that isn't all agendized and controlled? The other thing to be mindful of is, let's just think about the who. Who are you leading? So you have people in your organization, in your hierarchy, that are introverts and processors. These are the folks in meetings that you notice, and I notice on Zoom, that oftentimes do not unmute. I never see them reaching for the mouse to unmute. If they're called upon, for sure, though, they have something to say, but that they are really, they're thinkers. And oftentimes the speed in a Zoom meeting of sharing is going a mile a minute. Like I said, the chat is going at the same time that people are talking and sharing. It's a lot. And so, is there a way that we can better honor who's in the room by giving some space, by sending the questions or topics ahead of time, front loading those meetings, allowing for messaging after on a topic that maybe you don't ask for the input right during the meeting. You're going to send an email afterwards, and you're going to ask people to marinate a little bit. So it honors the groups that need some of that process time. Of course, if they're running to the next meeting, that creates additional challenge because it's like, what was that? Oh, that was 4 meetings ago. What was that about? But also just even using hand signals, right? Instead of just letting people unmute, creating some of those norms really can make a difference. And there's really this idea of two types of trust based on competence, trust based on motive. And again, you're over communicating, you're over demonstrative when you are in the virtual environment, just because of the fact that you're missing all of the body language cues. My aunt worked for Jostens Corporation, and she said a rule in their corporation was that if it took 3 emails, if there was anything that was 3 emails long, you needed to jump on a phone. And the research actually supports that as well. How many times have you gone back and forth 7 emails later and you've lost the thread of what were we talking about again? So jumping doesn't have to be on Zoom. You can jump on a phone call with somebody and clear something up. They can hear your voice, they can hear your smiling. There's oftentimes ways to navigate some of those missed tone moments by just jumping on a phone call. It can change everything. I know that we oftentimes, in my case, I'm doing that with students all the time. And when they hear me, they're like, oh, I thought you were mad. Or sometimes if I have a lot of feedback to give a student, like I have a doc student and I am going to give them a lot of feedback and they will likely be overwhelmed. I will do a video so they can see my face so that it's okay. They see like this is normal part of the writing process and is challenging and nuanced and all of the things. Oops. Digital meetings do take more prep than in person because you have to have all of it organized. You have to, you don't want to be clicking around while everyone is watching you. The idea of splitting your teams up into subgroups, putting them in breakout rooms of 2 or 3 to go talk about something and come back. It doesn't have to be a long time. You can say like, here's the topic. I'm sending you in breakout rooms for 3 minutes. Come up with something, bring it back to the group. Or I'm sending you out, you're going to talk about something that's sparkling in your life right now. And then we're going to come back together. That's a great way to start a meeting or a great way to end a meeting. And again, creates more opportunities for those informal communications, informal conversations about real life, what is happening in people's lives. There's a different level of fatigue when you are in back-to-back Zoom meetings. And so any way that we can shorten, offer breaks, provide some fun and joy, something creative, even random trivia, that people can do a poll, those things, the research indicates does make a difference for people feeling connected. And then, does every person have to be in every meeting, or can I send a rep? So I heard that people were starting to send AI in place of them. That's a little bit different. But the idea of if we have a team of two or 3 people, do all 3 of us need to be there, or can we take turns in who attends some of the meetings just to avoid some of the intensity of that? And then how is that information shared back? It's just oftentimes an area of challenge, especially because you're not running into each other in the halls. Being mindful that there are also differences in how genders receive information and process through it. There's generational differences regional differences, cultural differences. So again, when you are thinking about your Zoom squares or the people that you work with and being mindful of how information is received, how tone might be conveyed depending on terminology, are your y'alls, how is y'all landing? I have lots of colleagues in Texas that works for them. Does it land with my New Yorkers? Not necessarily. So, just some of those nuances that's important to think about. So I'm not going to waterfall this one. I just want you to think about, what does trust look and sound like in a work culture? So for example, when your boss sends a calendar invite without context or a text to connect, you don't get anxious. You go, oh, okay, this is great. I'm going to chat with them about something because I trust that everything is fine. And if it wasn't fine, they would let me know before all of this. When all employees are active in the screen and participating, when everybody is speaking up and they're willing to say different opinions, voices in the room are heard. There's an overall culture of positive intent. I'm not making assumptions about anyone who is asking a question. Doesn't mean they don't believe what's being said or that they are frustrated or angry about it. You hear leaders saying, is this working? What's not going well? What do we need to change? That there are created water cooler interactions. There are norms, protocols. People feel comfortable when they come into a meeting because the expectations are clear. People know how to send an email, who should be copied. If their boss is copied, they understand why that is. It's just for transparency, whatever the norms protocol is. But people feel it reduces anxiety because there are expectations. And we're continually asking for input and feedback about what's working. What does digital active listening look like? Prioritizing response time, answering all questions in an email. Again, setting up those calls or face-to-face if necessary. Use those bigger verbal cues. You have to indicate I'm listening. I oftentimes will even show both of my hands so that people know that I'm old school taking notes, or that I am not on my phone, that I am not watching a movie, that I am here fully present and listening to them. And giving people opportunity and time to share, listen, and respond for all of our participants. 4 strategies: clear communication, authentic leadership, generating a psychological safe space for our participants, people we work with, using technology, but mindfully using it, really thinking about what works and what doesn't, and generating shared meaning. There's a quote there. Think about. I love the idea of harnessing the broken parts of ourselves to access the best version. This is what I think about in a culture, that we might have things that are broken, but we can move forward and fix. What are some of the actions or strategies that I went at warp speed through for you today? What's something you want to try? Something that you think, oh, maybe that could be transformative for my space. What might work? So I want you to do a little bit of typing. All right, waterfall. Oh yeah, Margie, I see that. You're right. The loneliness, isolation, it's real. The research indicates that too. It is a challenge. Yeah, those micro moments, sometimes we think, oh, I have to go into a breakout room and I have to talk about my joy of the week or something. And I think, oh, do I have time for this? Why aren't we making the best use? But the reality is, the research says it connects me. So if Bob and I were talking about where we lived before, we know something about each other. If Bob and I have an opportunity to have dinner in a shared space, we are we're back for graduation, something like that, we are more likely to chat with each other because we had an opportunity in a breakout room to just chit chat about what it's like living in 2 different states, or, So those micro moments that you can create are really important, even if there are times that you think, oh, is this a good use of my time? They make a difference and they make people feel connected. The icebreakers are fun. Like, I try to find those really fun icebreakers They do make a difference. That's a great strategy. Yeah, people are lots of hard things in the world, lots of hard things that people are going through, and getting people to be real about what is happening in their world is powerful and transformative. And in order to feel the care connection, to fill the marble jar, in order to fill the marble jar, so that if you have a last minute request, even though our norms are we're not going to have last minute requests, it does, you have a full marble jar, so a couple marbles coming out is okay. If that marble jar isn't very full because we haven't created those shared trustful moments with each other, we're depleting an empty jar. Thanks, everybody. Here's some references that are there for you, some of the additional sources that I have nerded out about as I continue working, like as a leader, how do I make this better in this virtual space? And my contact information is there. I'm happy if you want to jump on camera and unmute if you have any additional thoughts or considerations as I move forward with this, or things that you're thinking about in your space as well.
I wanted just to say thank you, thank you, thank you from the bottom of my heart. I have been attending these wonderful conferences, and I tell you what, I have been processing everything you're saying because I was tempted to write an article and put it in LinkedIn about the isolation.
Yes.
And yes, I think we romanticize the idea of working online and being, oh yes, I can do all this, all that, blah, blah, blah. Yes, that's the daily grind, but we cannot forget the socialization necessary to stay connected with another human being. I want to say at our level of intellect, right? That we can brainstorm, that we can project, discuss, strategize, dream about the programs and expansion and improvement of all the things that we're doing at work. Who do you talk to?
That's right.
If you're at home remotely, and of course your husband or spouse or whoever is looking at you going, nodding their head and going, yes, yes, I understand. But but no, you don't, you need that interaction. And I shared with you earlier that I noticed when we go to Zoom meetings that there are 2 or 3 people that have had the opportunity to attend conferences and they meet in person. You can see the warmness, the beautiful interaction, because they've developed that trust, because they've had that opportunity to interact in person, right? And then those of us that don't know those individuals, we haven't had that opportunity to meet them in person. So there is a tremendous value in coming together and meeting in face to face and getting to know one another. So I thank you from the bottom of my heart, because you just validated all of the stuff that I have been thinking, and you've given me so many wonderful ideas and great insight in making my world better. Thank you.
Oh, I love that. Thank you for that. You know, all of that resonates with me. I think about, my husband, he says we drive him nuts when we come together as a group, like when we come for graduation. I had everyone over to the house one time. There are 60 people here. We are ridiculous. Like the squealing and like we are so excited to see another person. Like you would think that we have been in a a little box for half a year, but we are so happy to be together. And those in-person moments, I cannot replicate. I have 10 years, I've been trying to figure this out. How do I replicate those moments? Not everybody can come together for a variety of reasons. So what are things that I can do in a fully remote space to generate some kind of joy and connection, the same that I would do if I was sitting having a meal with somebody. And in those in-person conferences, I feel the same. Like I'm absorbing, almost to the point, since I've been remote for so long, I have to go back to my room and just have some quiet, because it's like almost too much. Like I almost can't take, too
Yes.
much. It's a lot of peopling, as I would say. And my poor husband, you're right, has to listen to all the things that happen during the day, because I don't have anybody to just run in the hallway and be like, oh my gosh, I
Yes.
can't believe
Yes.
we were asked to turn this in tomorrow.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And so I think leaning into figuring out, like I have a nice group of friends that I have set up a steady text thread with. That really does help me. Like I rely on that. But what we have shifted to is audio messages, because we want to just hear each other's voice. I want to hear them tell me the story, not read it in a text, because I'm reading all day long. So, some of those little nuances can certainly help too.
I just had to, it just came to my mind as I'm listening to your beautiful presentation and your explanation. There is nothing can replace the electricity of human
Yeah.
connection.
Yep. A zillion percent true. Yes. Yeah. And to think that we can just shift to fully remote and have the same sort of culture without doing real intentional work is where I think we have kind of gone wrong. And it's something I think we're going to continue to struggle with as organizations that are remote.
Beautiful.
I agree. I agree. And oh, I'd love to talk more, but I got to get to the next
Yes.
session. This was very good. I really appreciate everything you said. It has always been a challenge, doing remote work. So
Yep.
I
I'm
appreciate
sorry.
it.
Kelly, can you put your email again? I know I apologize. I
Sure.
was talking and I forgot to see it.
I'll type it in the chat for you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you, Bob.
Thanks, Bob. Here we go. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everybody. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Have a good rest of the day.
Thanks, you too.